You're the doctor, aren't you?
No. I'm a professor.
I don't believe you. She wants me looked at. They think I'm different.
Well, perhaps they're right.
I'm not mad.
Hogwarts is not a place for mad people. Hogwarts is a school. School of magic. You can do things, can't you, Tom? Things other children can't.
I can make things move without touching them. I can make animals do what I want without training them. I can make bad things happen to people who are mean to me. I can make them hurt. If I want. Who are you?
Well, I'm like you, Tom. I'm different.
Prove it.
And indeed,
And he does.
He does.
See that wardrobe?
See, yes. Okay, so just the nuts and bolts stuff. We have Jim Broadbent as Horace Slughorn, who's the potions professor, who is brought in partly because of what he knows about potions, but more significantly because what he remembers about Voldemort. Now, here's an interesting thing. I think that some of the response to the new movie has not been entirely positive. I've certainly read a couple of reviews that said, well, this is kind of a bit lacklustre. There's an awful lot of plot. In fact, you yourself said just a minute ago, there is an awful lot of plot to get through, okay? I'm going to lay my cards on the table with one reservation, which we'll come to, regarding the unhappy event. I think this is the second best Potter movie that I've seen.
Behind Azkaban?
Behind Azkaban. I still think Azkaban, in many ways, Azkaban is an easier nut to crack because it's, as far as the condensing of the material is concerned for the purpose of a movie, it is more self-contained. I mean, we have now got to a point in the story when there are so many threads running simultaneously that actually, of course it feels episodic because there's neither a beginning nor an end, although this does have a climax. I thought that, watching it, two things. Firstly, I thought when I was a kid, why didn't people make movies like this for me? Because it was the closest I've seen to a kid's horror film, a proper kid's horror film, in as much as a film about good versus evil, and the idea of evil itself existing as a concept rather than just something which has to be, just fought with fists, which is the kind of Transformers movie. So number one. The second thing, actually in relation to that, some of the members of the cast have talked about how after the darkness of the last one, this was a little bit of kind of light relief, which I didn't feel it was at all. I think what it is it's a better movie. And the last movie I thought did suffer from the problem of too much plot, Your Majesty, and too many notes and too many things that you actually had to get in, and too much condensing. In the case of this, considering how unwieldy the book is, and necessarily unwieldy, I thought, firstly, they did a really good job with the screenplay of condensing the stuff down. And secondly, I thought from a directorial point of view, he did a really good job of getting that sense of an impending catastrophe, of an impending meeting of good and evil. Now, a lot of press attention has been given to the fact that the Vatican, sort of said, whether officially or unofficially, that this is that they're kind of happy with it. Now, at the very beginning of the Harry Potter stuff, there was a lot of fuss about whether the Catholic Church were against the idea of anything about wizards and magic. That was all bad. And now they've come around and said, well, in fact, we think that this is about good and evil. I know it's very
well spotted.
No, I know, and I know it's
almost a decade to work.
It's
that
very, and obviously it's easy to sneer, as you just have done. And I'm kind of with you. I'm not Catholic, and I'm with you on that because the fact is that anybody who thought that this wasn't about that is foolish. But it is significant that this is the moment at which they finally caught up, because it's so clearly about more than just the action that's happening. It is so clearly about something which is virtually existential that there's no way you could possibly misinterpret it. But it is still playing to an audience who I think, it's not for very young kids, because there are ideas in it that I find very disturbing. There are sequences in it that are very worrying. There is one particular sequence in it which I think we'll discuss after the break.
Yeah, we'll do that.
But generally, and with the exception of two things, one which we'll talk about, and secondly the absence of Jason Isaacs, no fault of the filmmakers, nothing they could do about that, although they did invent a scene that didn't, I think it's the second best.
Okay, and we'll get to the problem, and unfortunately the problem is quite a big problem because it's essentially the last 10-15 minutes, and it revolves around the unhappy event. We've got lots and lots of emails from people who've seen it. Lots of tweets have come in as well. We're halfway through, three-quarters, 7/8 of the way through our Harry Potter conversation. Harry Potter 6 came out on Wednesday. You've already said you think it's the second best, behind Prisoner of Azkaban. We'll come to the reservations in just a second.
Okay. The other stuff that I think that's really worth noting, firstly, obviously it's directed by David Yates, who I obviously did, the previous one, Phoenix, which I did have some reservations about largely, that I thought that was, too much plot. And I think there's a real demonstration here of having got to grips with the material. I think he's now, obviously working on the last two. I think it's very interesting how, when that cast was chosen, they would have been very, very young, and who could have told that they were going to grow up as well as they have done on screen. I mean, people have talked about watching them grow up on screen. Actually, I think the most impressive thing is that of the central players, they've all turned into pretty solid, accomplished actors, and you really do believe those roles. And it's kind of odd that none of them have fallen by the way. I think they hold their own very well. Tom Felton, particularly in this one, who you see as Draco Malfoy, who comes centre stage and actually does a really, really good job with a very difficult role, because up until now he's been, he's on the side, and part, of course, he's having to hold his own against Snape, which is in many ways the most attractive role, and also the most complex role, and also the one that everybody, obviously it's doing the written thing here. So generally, from a cast point of view, from a point of view of the way it looks, from a point of view, most importantly, of getting through that material, marshalling and making something which in the middle of the story essentially changes direction and goes off in a different way. I thought it was a really good, really solid job of making a film for older children, I stress the older children, that deals with good and evil in a way that is both palatable and slightly scary, which I really like.
The reason why I think some people will leave feeling, oh no, I don't think that's really worked, is because the last 15 minutes doesn't work, and it doesn't work because now we're going to refer to the unhappy event. There is a very, very unhappy event towards the end of this movie. But the unhappy event relies on one crucial plot point, and that is the fact that Harry has been paralysed in the book and therefore cannot take action against this unhappy event. And just a big appeal for a wicket anyway. The umpire's not interested.
No.
And he's invisible because he's under his invisibility cloak. So the whole reason why he doesn't step in and take action against the unhappy event is because he can't. Whereas here, he's just looking on and not doing anything, and that doesn't make sense because we know he's a brave...
Well, here's what I would say about this, and again, for those who don't know, as I said, we are referring to this as the unhappy event. It's a very difficult scene to do. It is different in the book. You are quite right that on film, it is a crucial difference in that Harry doesn't intervene because he's told not to intervene, whereas in the book, he physically cannot intervene. Now, I wonder whether this is going to have some significance further on down the road, and I have to say that
I think you're being charitable there.
Yeah, that's possibly true. I think it says something about how much I like the rest of the movie, that when we got to something which with another head on, I would have said, well, that's it, you can't fumble that moment. I would have felt that was completely wrong. What happened was, what I felt was a sense of confusion. Now, that is not to say that the unhappy event does not still contain great unhappiness, which it does, nor to say that I came out feeling dissatisfied. I came out feeling I can't quite figure out why it was that they did it in that way.
Here is an email which gets to some of the matter. Simon from Ilkley in West Yorkshire.
And it's not giving away plot details.
Well, it does, but I'll busk it. Dear Gredden Forge, Harry Potter 6. Love the books, was really looking forward to the film. Not overly impressed for a number of reasons. They insisted on changing the location of a lot of the scenes. Slughorn's first Slug Club meeting is in his own room rather than on a train. Yeah. No fight scene at the end between the Death Eaters and the Phoenix lot. Ron, Hermione, Ginny, which actually makes the ending far less exciting than it needs to be.
Or you can say it refines it and makes it a much more intimate and therefore worrying event.
And what was with destroying the Weasleys' house? Like to see them get out of that one. In HP 7 Part 1, there was also a distinct lack of verbal description of why something was happening in some parts, which some cinema goers may have found hard to swallow. Overall, a little disappointed, but can't wait for Harry Potter 7. But the ending was anticlimactical, I would suggest to you. Desmond Trevor James Anderson, BA Philosophy and Sociology, pending 2010. Just got home from watching the new instalment. I have to say that I really enjoyed it. Thought there was a level of humour present which hadn't really been a feature of the previous films, which is odd, as it also follows the darkening trend of the Harry Potter franchise.
It does.
Great performance from Jim Broadbent, really helped the film along and again added some truly comic moments. I think it's worth mentioning the small but impressive contribution of Frank Delane as the adolescent Tom Riddle. He was only in a couple of scenes, but I got a profound chill whenever he made an appearance, and worth saying he's the nephew of Ray Fiennes.
So you tell me.
Who, of course, is Voldemort, so,
yes.
Which is quite a nice...
It's got to make sense.
I must admit, says Desmond Trevor James Anderson, I'm no Harry Potter fan and in fact have been quite a vehement opponent to the whole dratted movement, but I was given an enjoyable double evening at the cinema with this film will not be sad to see the release of the final offering, partly out of relief and now partly out of genuine interest.
No, I am genuinely interested. I should say for the record, I laughed, I cried, I wanted...
It is the funniest of the
There is, and actually one of the great balancing acts of it is that it does have great humour, but that humour is balanced, absolutely, by a sense of darkness and a sense of, as I said, genuine impending catastrophe. So that when the thing happens, which of course, what happens at the end will of course mirror what happens at the end. So we're kind of getting a pre-echo of what's going to happen anyway. I thought it was really well held together, because usually if you try and mix those two things, you try and mix humour and horror, you put them alongside each other, they can often defuse each other, and I didn't think that happened at all. I also thought, incidentally, it played up the humanity of the kids much more than the last instalment, in which they felt much more like pawns to be moved around in a story which was bigger than them, which is of course one of the themes of the movie.
Rachel Phelan, these came through on Twitter. I loved it. The humour was truly funny and the darkness just dark enough, and all young actors have improved greatly. Adam Brammer, the unhappy event is highly underplayed, as is the whole film. Big disappointment, worst one so far, methinks. H. Maxwell Motley says the Half-Blood Prince reveal is a non-event, and the unhappy event didn't feel as sad as the unhappy event in Harry Potter 4.
Which was the death of Sirius Black. I disagree.
No,
I thought the unhappy event in being the death of Sirius Black happened really fast, to the point that you almost didn't notice it. But then, of course, that is actually one of the points of that scene, is that the line between life and death is very, very short. I mean, I genuinely was moved at the same time as being confused by the unhappy event. Sorry, this feels so... It's like having a coded conversation, but we don't want... If you don't know what the unhappy event is, we don't want to say what it is.
Everybody knows. I mean,
apparently everybody does, but some people didn't, so when you said it last week, some people said, thank you for telling me.
Those who don't,
I think it's interesting that some people have written in to say it's the worst one, because I think it is going to divide people. I mean, I had one of those really strange experiences when I sat there in the film thinking, gosh, this is really good, this is really good, wow, this is really good. And I got up, and the first person I spoke to said, what was all that about then? And the last time I remember that happening was I went to see Brazil with my friend Duncan Cooper, and I sat there going, wow, this is amazing. And we walked out in silence, and I turned to him and I went, well, he went, yeah, it was terrible, wasn't it? But in a way, that divisive quality I think is quite good. I also think that with time, this will I will be proven to be right, that it is the second best.
You actually think you're right?
Actually, on this
real turn up
on
for
this
the book.
particular count, I do.
I still think that people will think, yes, absolutely right, all the way through, very good, but leave with a sense of disappointment, because they have. I think they've misjudged the ending completely, and I think it really undermines everything else.
I think there's something strange about the ending. I confess to you, I don't understand why. And in fact, you and I had talked about it, but is there a reason? Is it because you have to be able to see Harry at that moment? But I just don't know. And considering what a good job they've done for the rest of it, condensing it, it can't be something that happened accidentally. I mean, there must have been a really big meeting in which they decided to play it in the way they have.
Now, I think we're virtually out of time here. So would you say that Harry Potter's the movie of the week?
I would, actually. I mean, I really, really like Moon. I think Moon is really, really good, and I'd be inclined to say, in fact, Moon and Harry Potter are joint movie of the week. But if you pushed me one way, just because, and the more people write in and say, yes, I think it is.